The courtroom was silent. Everyone held their breath. A 9-year-old girl stood on the witness stand, her small hands gripping the wooden railing tightly. Her father, sitting across from her, had tears in his eyes. Her mother, in the front row, was trembling. The judge leaned forward, his voice steady. "Do you understand the importance of telling the truth, Emily?" Emily nodded. Her heart pounded in her chest. She looked at the man sitting with his lawyer, the man who had made her family's life a nightmare. Her father's boss, Mr. Grayson. He smirked, as if he had already won. But Emily took a deep breath and said the words that changed everything. "I saw what he did. I saw Mr. Grayson take the money and blame my dad. He's lying." A collective gasp filled the room. Mr. Grayson's smirk disappeared. The lawyer beside him stiffened. Emily's father's eyes widened. The judge's gavel hit the table. Silence in the courtroom. The tension was thick, like a storm about to break. Everyone waited for what would happen next. A few months earlier, Emily's life was perfect. She lived in a warm house with her loving parents and little brother, Jamie. Her father, Daniel Carter, worked as an accountant at Grayson Industries. He was honest and hardworking, always telling Emily to do the right thing, no matter what. But one night, everything changed. Emily woke up to loud voices downstairs. She tiptoed to the stairs and peeked through the railing. Her father was pacing the living room, his face pale. Her mother, Laura, had tears in her eyes. "They fired you?" Laura whispered. Daniel nodded. "They accused me of stealing money from the company, but that's impossible. You would never do that." Daniel ran a hand through his hair. "I know, but they have evidence. Mr. Grayson said there's proof that I took over $100,000. He even told the police." Emily's stomach twisted. She didn't understand everything, but she knew this was bad. "They'll arrest you?" Laura's voice cracked. Daniel didn't answer. He didn't have to. The silence said it all. Emily couldn't sleep that night. She stared at the ceiling, trying to make sense of it. Her father wasn't a thief. He was the best person she knew. Something wasn't right. The next morning, as Emily ate her cereal, she overheard her parents talking. "The trial is in a few months," Daniel said. "If I can't prove I'm innocent, I could go to jail." Jail. The word sent chills down Emily's spine. That night, she made a decision. She had to find out the truth. Over the next few weeks, Emily started watching everything. When she went with her dad to his old office to pick up his things, she kept her eyes open. She noticed the way Mr. Grayson avoided looking at her father, the way the employees whispered. One afternoon, she saw something she wasn't supposed to see. She had followed her dad inside Grayson Industries, pretending she needed to use the restroom. But instead of going to the restroom, she snuck toward Mr. Grayson's office. The door was slightly open. Inside, Mr. Grayson was talking to someone. "They'll never prove it," he laughed. "Carter will take the fall. The fool doesn't even know I set him up." Emily froze. Her heart pounded in her ears. "I switched the records," Mr. Grayson continued. "The fake documents are perfect. By the time anyone finds out, it'll be too late." Emily covered her mouth to keep from gasping. Mr. Grayson had done it. He was the thief, not her father. She ran back to the lobby before anyone saw her. For weeks, she carried that secret. She wanted to tell someone, but she was just a kid. Who would believe her? Then came the worst day of her life. The police came to their house. They arrested her father. Emily screamed. "No, he didn't do anything." Her mother clutched her, sobbing. As the police took her father away, Emily knew what she had to do. She had to speak the truth, even if no one believed her. The trial day arrived. Emily had never been more nervous in her life. The courtroom was big and cold. Her father looked tired. Mr. Grayson looked confident. And then, it was her turn to speak. As she took the stand, her heart pounded. The lawyer asked her questions. The judge watched her closely. And then came the moment that changed everything. "I saw what he did. I saw Mr. Grayson take the money and blame my dad. He's lying." The room exploded into chaos. Mr. Grayson's face turned red. He stood up. "She's just a kid. She doesn't know what she's talking about." But Emily wasn't afraid anymore. "I heard you say it. You said you changed the records. You wanted my dad to take the fall." The judge banged his gavel. The lawyer looked stunned. Emily, are you sure? Emily nodded. Yes, I know what I heard. Everyone turned to Mr. Grayson. His smirk was gone. And then, a police officer stood up. Your Honor, we request a recess. The judge nodded. Granted. Emily watched as the officers whispered to the lawyers. She had done it. But what would happen next? Emily sat frozen in the witness stand, her heart pounding. She had said the words that could change everything. But now, the room was in chaos. The judge slammed his gavel again. Order in the court. The police officer who had stood up whispered something to the prosecutor, and the man's eyes widened. Mr. Grayson, who had looked so confident before, was now gripping the edge of the table, his face pale. Emily's mother, sitting in the front row, had tears streaming down her face. Her father, handcuffed beside his lawyer, looked at her with shock and pride. Your Honor, the prosecutor said, standing up, we need a short recess to review some new information. The judge nodded. Very well. This court is in recess for 30 minutes. With a bang of the gavel, people started moving. Mr. Grayson's lawyer leaned close to him, whispering furiously. The police officers stepped out of the courtroom. Emily was quickly taken down from the stand by a court assistant and led to her mother. Laura wrapped her arms around her daughter. Oh, my sweet girl, I am so proud of you. Emily pressed her face into her mother's shoulder, trying to calm her racing heart. But she wasn't scared anymore. She had done the right thing. Still, she knew this wasn't over. As she sat beside her mother, she noticed something strange. Mr. Grayson was trying to act normal, but his hands were shaking. His lawyer was frantically flipping through papers, his face tight with worry. Something was happening. A few minutes later, the prosecutor and the police officers returned, speaking in hushed tones. Then, her father's lawyer stood up and walked over to them. Emily watched closely as they exchanged quiet words, their faces serious. Then, suddenly, the doors to the courtroom burst open. 2 more police officers walked in. Everyone turned to see what was happening. One officer walked straight to Mr. Grayson. Sir, we need you to come with us for questioning. The room gasped. Mr. Grayson's face drained of color. What? His voice cracked. This is ridiculous. I am the victim here. The officer didn't budge. We received new information from a witness that contradicts your claims. We need to investigate immediately. Mr. Grayson's lawyer jumped up. My client will not answer any questions without proper legal. Then he will be taken into custody until further notice. The officer interrupted. Gasps filled the courtroom. Emily's eyes widened. Was this really happening? Mr. Grayson shot up from his seat. This is a mistake. She's a little girl. You're going to believe her over me? The officer pulled out a pair of handcuffs. Stand up, Mr. Grayson. Everyone held their breath. And then, Mr. Grayson did something no one expected. He ran. Pushing past his lawyer, he bolted for the door. The courtroom erupted into chaos as officers lunged after him. People screamed. Chairs toppled over. Emily grabbed her mother's hand, fear returning to her chest. 2 officers chased Mr. Grayson down the hall. The courtroom doors swung wildly. A moment later, a loud thud echoed from outside. Everyone rushed toward the doors. When Emily peeked through the crowd, she saw Mr. Grayson on the ground, face down, hands behind his back. The officers cuffed him and pulled him to his feet. His face was red with fury. You have no proof, he shouted. This is a setup. One of the officers looked at him coldly. Actually, we just checked your office security footage. Turns out, you forgot to erase all the evidence. Emily's jaw dropped. The evidence? The officer looked toward the judge. Your Honor, we need to place Mr. Grayson under arrest. The judge nodded slowly. Proceed. Emily couldn't believe it. She had done it. Her father was safe. Or was he? Because just as she thought it was over, her father's lawyer turned to them with a grim expression. This is good news, he said, but we still have a problem. Emily's stomach dropped. What do you mean? Her mother asked. The lawyer sighed. Just because Mr. Grayson has been arrested doesn't mean Daniel is cleared yet. We need to prove beyond doubt that he was framed. Otherwise, he didn't finish the sentence. But Emily knew what he meant. Her father could still go to jail. And suddenly, the fear was back. Emily clenched her mother's hand as the reality sank in. Even though Mr. Grayson had been arrested, her father was still in danger. The judge called everyone back into the courtroom. The air was thick with tension. Mr. Grayson, now handcuffed, sat with his lawyer, his face burning with rage. Emily's father was still sitting beside his own lawyer, hands clasped tightly together. "All rise," the bailiff announced as the judge returned. Everyone stood, then sat back down as the judge took his seat. "Mr. Grayson has been placed under arrest for attempting to flee the court and for suspected fraud," the judge said firmly. "However, we must now determine if Mr. Carter's charges should be dismissed or if further investigation is needed." Emily's heart pounded. Why couldn't they just let her father go? The real criminal had been caught. Her father's lawyer stood up. "Your Honor, in light of the new evidence, I request an immediate dismissal of all charges against my client." The prosecutor, looking uncertain, stood up next. "Your Honor, while the evidence against Mr. Grayson is compelling, we must still follow the proper legal process. We need to fully verify the security footage and financial records before dropping the case against Mr. Carter." Emily's mother gasped. "But that could take weeks." Her father looked calm, but Emily saw the worry in his eyes. The judge sighed. "I understand the need for a thorough investigation. Mr. Carter, until this case is fully reviewed, you will remain in custody." Emily's stomach dropped. "But you will not be sent to prison at this time," the judge finished. "Instead, you will be placed under house arrest." A wave of relief washed over the room. Emily felt like she could breathe again. Her father wouldn't be locked away. The judge banged the gavel. "Court is adjourned until further notice." Emily rushed to her father, throwing her arms around him. "I knew you didn't do it," she cried. Her father kissed the top of her head. "Thank you, sweetheart. You are the bravest girl I know." The officers removed his handcuffs, replacing them with an ankle monitor instead. It wasn't perfect, but at least he was coming home. As they left the courthouse, reporters swarmed them, flashing cameras in their faces. "Mr. Carter, how does it feel to be free?" "Emily, what made you speak up in court?" "Mr. Grayson, do you have anything to say for yourself?" Mr. Grayson, being dragged away by officers, snarled at the reporters. "This isn't over." Emily shivered. Something about the way he said it sent a chill down her spine. That night, their home felt warm again. Even though her father had to wear an ankle monitor, he was home. They ate dinner together, and for the first time in weeks, they laughed. But Emily couldn't shake a feeling deep in her stomach. Mr. Grayson's words echoed in her head. This isn't over. And she was right to be worried. Because at exactly midnight, a loud crash came from downstairs. Emily shot up in bed, heart racing. She looked toward Jamie's crib, where her little brother was still sleeping. Then she heard it again. Glass shattering. Her mother's terrified voice. "Daniel, someone's in the house." Emily froze. Footsteps thundered downstairs. Then, a voice she recognized. Mr. Grayson. Her blood turned to ice. And then the lights went out. The house was swallowed in darkness. Emily's breath caught in her throat. Her mother's terrified voice rang out again. "Daniel, call the police." Footsteps pounded on the hardwood floor downstairs. Then a deep, menacing voice echoed through the house. "You think you won, Carter?" It was Mr. Grayson. Emily's stomach clenched with fear. How had he escaped? He was supposed to be in police custody. She heard her father's voice, strong and steady. "Get out of my house, Grayson." A low chuckle followed. "Oh, I don't think so. You and your little brat ruined my life. I'm here to make sure you pay." Emily's hands trembled as she scrambled out of bed. She had to protect Jamie. She tiptoed to his crib and gently picked him up. He stirred but didn't wake. She needed to hide. Downstairs, a struggle broke out. Glass shattered. Furniture toppled. A loud thud echoed through the house, followed by her mother's scream. Emily's heart raced. She clutched Jamie tightly and backed into the closet, pressing herself against the wall. Then, footsteps on the stairs. Heavy, slow, deliberate. He was coming up. Emily's breath came in short, shaky gasps. She squeezed her eyes shut, willing herself to disappear. The floorboards creaked just outside her bedroom. Then, the door handle turned. She held Jamie close, covering his mouth in case he woke up and cried. The door swung open with a loud creak. Silence. Then, a pair of heavy boots stepped into the room. Emily barely dared to breathe. The closet door was slightly open. A sliver of moonlight from the window illuminated a shadow standing in the doorway. She could see him. Mr. Grayson. His suit was torn, his face twisted in rage. His eyes darted around the room, scanning. Emily's hands were slick with sweat as she held Jamie tighter. Seconds felt like hours. Then, just as she thought he might leave, the closet door ripped open. Light flooded in. Emily screamed. Mr. Grayson's furious eyes locked onto her. There you are, you little rat. His hand shot forward. Emily ducked, shielding Jamie with her body. But before he could grab her, a loud bang filled the house. Mr. Grayson staggered backward, his hand flying to his shoulder, his face twisted in shock. Behind him, Emily's father stood, holding a fireplace poker. His chest rose and fell heavily. Grayson's knees buckled, and he hit the floor with a grunt. Emily's father dropped the poker and rushed forward, grabbing Emily and Jamie into his arms. Are you okay? His voice trembled as he cupped her face. Emily could only nod, still shaking. Sirens blared outside. Flashing red and blue lights filled the windows. The front door burst open, and police officers stormed in. Freeze! One of them shouted. But Mr. Grayson wasn't moving anymore. Blood dripped from his shoulder. His breathing was ragged. The officers quickly restrained him. We've been searching for him all night, one of them said, shaking his head. He escaped custody before we could fully process him. Emily's mother ran upstairs, sobbing as she wrapped her arms around them all. I thought we lost you, she whispered. The police took Mr. Grayson away. This time, there would be no escape. As they sat in the living room, surrounded by officers taking statements, Emily clung to her father's arm. It's over, she whispered. Her father kissed her forehead. You were so brave. But deep in Emily's heart, she couldn't shake a feeling. Was it really over? Or was there something worse coming? Emily sat curled up on the couch, still trembling. The house was filled with police officers, their radios crackling as they took statements from her parents. Flashing red and blue lights flooded through the windows, making eerie shadows dance across the walls. Jamie, still too young to understand, slept peacefully in her mother's arms. Emily wished she could do the same. Mr. Grayson was gone. Handcuffed, bleeding, hauled away in a police car. But Emily couldn't shake the icy fear in her chest. What if he came back? What if this wasn't really over? Her father sat beside her, one arm wrapped protectively around her shoulders. His other hand was clenched into a fist. He was trying to stay strong, but she could feel the tension in his body. The chief of police, a tall man with a thick mustache, stepped forward. Mr. Carter, I have to be honest with you. This wasn't just a simple break-in. Grayson was desperate. He wasn't just trying to scare you. He was here to silence you. Emily's mother let out a shaky breath. But why? He's already been caught. The chief sighed. Because if the investigation goes deeper, we might find out that Mr. Grayson wasn't working alone. Emily's father's jaw tightened. You mean, someone else helped him? The chief nodded. And if that's the case, your family is still in danger. Emily's stomach twisted. This wasn't over. The police decided to station 2 officers outside their home for the night, just in case. But even with the police nearby, Emily barely slept. Every creak of the house made her jolt awake. Every shadow looked like something lurking. At some point, exhaustion took over, and she drifted off. But the nightmare wasn't over. The next morning, Emily woke to the sound of her mother gasping in horror. She shot up from the couch, heart pounding. Mom? Her mother stood frozen by the front door, staring at something. Emily ran over and looked outside. Her blood ran cold. Spray painted across their garage door were 3 words in thick, black letters. Stay silent or else. Emily's hands clenched into fists. Someone else was involved. Someone didn't want them talking. Her father's face darkened. This has to be one of Grayson's people. The officers outside their house rushed forward, inspecting the graffiti. One of them turned to Emily's father. We'll check the security cameras. Whoever did this won't get far. Emily's mother was shaking. What if they come back? What if They won't, her father said firmly. I won't let them. But Emily could hear the doubt in his voice. That afternoon, her father's lawyer, Mr. Holloway, arrived at their house. He was an older man with kind eyes and a serious face. He sat down with Emily's parents, opening his briefcase. We have a problem, he said immediately. Emily sat nearby, listening closely. Mr. Holloway continued, the investigation into Grayson's crimes has uncovered something much bigger. He wasn't just stealing money for himself. He was covering up illegal deals for powerful people. People who don't want to be exposed. Emily's mother paled. You mean, people like the ones who vandalized our house? Mr. Holloway nodded. Exactly. And now, those people see your family as a threat. Silence filled the room. Emily looked at her father. His face was set in stone, but she could see the worry in his eyes. What do we do? Her father finally asked. Mr. Holloway took a deep breath. You have two choices. One, we keep fighting this in court, and I promise you, the truth will come out. But that means you and your family will be in danger until this is over. Emily swallowed hard. And the second option? Her mother asked, her voice shaking. Mr. Holloway hesitated. You disappear. I can help you relocate. Change your names. Start fresh. But that means leaving everything behind. Your home, your jobs, your friends, everything. Emily's stomach dropped. Leave? Run away? No. This was their home. She wouldn't let those bad people take it from them. Her father's fist clenched. No, we're not running. We're not letting them win. Mr. Holloway nodded grimly. Then you need to be ready. Because they're going to come after you again. Emily's chest tightened. Her father was innocent. She had already proven Mr. Grayson was a liar. But now, something much bigger was coming. And this time, they might not be able to stop it. That night, Emily couldn't sleep. The words spray-painted on their garage door played over and over in her head. Stay silent or else. She pulled the blankets over her head, trying to push the fear away. But she couldn't. Because deep down, she knew. Whoever had written those words wasn't finished with them. And she was right. The next morning, her father checked the security footage from the cameras outside their house. Emily, standing behind him, watched as the screen showed blurry figures moving in the dark. They knew exactly where the cameras were, her father muttered. They kept their faces hidden. Her mother rubbed her arms. So what do we do now? Just wait for them to come back? We stay alert, her father said. And we don't let fear control us. Emily wished she could feel as strong as her father sounded. But by noon, her fear turned into something worse. Rage. These people wanted to scare them into silence. But she had already proven that she wasn't afraid to speak the truth. And she wouldn't stop now. That afternoon, a knock came at the door. Emily was in the living room playing with Jamie when she heard her father answer it. Detective Harris, her father said, surprised. Emily perked up and turned toward the doorway. A tall, broad-shouldered man in a suit stood outside. His face was hard, but his eyes were kind. Mr. Carter, the detective said, I need to speak with you and your wife. It's important. Emily's mother appeared beside her father, concern in her eyes. What is it? Detective Harris sighed and stepped inside. Mr. Grayson is dead. Silence. Emily's eyes widened. What? Her mother gasped. The detective nodded grimly. He was found in his holding cell early this morning. The official report says suicide, but, he hesitated. Let's just say not everyone believes that. Emily's father's face darkened. You think someone got to him? The detective crossed his arms. Mr. Grayson was a powerful man, but he was also just one piece of a much larger operation. If someone took him out, it's because they were afraid of what he might say. A cold chill ran down Emily's spine. This wasn't just about Mr. Grayson anymore. Someone bigger was behind this. And if they silenced Grayson, what would they do to her family? That night, Emily sat on her bed, deep in thought. She had never been more afraid in her life. But at the same time, something inside her burned. She had exposed Grayson. She had helped stop a bad man. But now there were more bad people out there. And they were coming for them. Emily clenched her fists. No, She wasn't going to just sit back and wait. She needed to find out who was behind this, and she needed to do it fast, because if they didn't stop these people soon, they might not get another chance. Emily lay awake long after everyone else had gone to bed. Her mind raced with everything Detective Harris had said. Mr. Grayson was dead. Someone had silenced him before he could reveal the truth, and that meant whoever was really behind this was still out there, waiting, watching. She couldn't let them win. Emily glanced at Jamie, sleeping peacefully in his crib. Her parents had worked so hard to protect them, but now she had to protect them too. She slid out of bed, moving as quietly as possible. If her parents knew what she was about to do, they would never allow it. But she had to try. She had to find the truth. The next morning, as her parents sat in the kitchen, discussing security options with Detective Harris, Emily made her move. She grabbed her backpack, stuffed her notebook and a flashlight inside, and slipped out the back door. She knew exactly where she was going. Grayson Industries. If there were any clues about who else was involved, they would be there. Getting inside wasn't easy. The building was locked up, its doors chained shut. Yellow police investigation tape was stretched across the entrance. But Emily wasn't giving up. She crept around the side of the building, searching for another way in. Finally, she found a small side window, cracked open just enough for her to squeeze through. Her heart pounded as she climbed inside, landing softly on the dusty floor. The place was eerie. Desks were abandoned, computers covered in dust. The only sound was the faint hum of electricity. Emily took a deep breath and moved quickly. She had no idea what she was looking for, but she had to find something. Then, she saw it. A locked office with a nameplate that made her stomach twist. Grayson, CEO. Her hands trembled as she reached for the doorknob. Locked. But then, she noticed a small keypad beside the door. Emily's mind raced. What would Mr. Grayson use as a passcode? She thought back to everything she had overheard in his office before. Then, she remembered. The number he always bragged about. His biggest deal. She punched in the numbers, 4-5-2-1. A beep. A click. The door unlocked. Emily's breath hitched. She pushed the door open and stepped inside. The office was immaculate, too clean, like someone had wiped it down in a hurry. But something caught her eye. A single USB drive, sitting inside an open drawer. Her heart pounded as she grabbed it and stuffed it into her pocket. Then, a noise outside the office. Footsteps. Emily froze. Someone else was here. She barely had time to duck behind the desk before the door swung open. A shadow stepped inside. Emily's breath came in short gasps as she peered through a small gap in the desk. A man in a black suit stood there, scanning the room. His face was partially hidden by the dim light, but Emily could see his eyes, cold and searching. He was looking for something. Maybe the same thing she had just found. The USB. Emily's hands shook as she slowly, carefully, pulled her backpack over her chest, hiding the bulge in her pocket. The man stepped further into the office. For a moment, he seemed to hesitate, then let out an irritated grunt. And just like that, he turned and left. Emily stayed hidden, counting to 20 before daring to move. Her heart hammered as she crept out of the office, tiptoeing back toward the window. But just as she climbed out, a hand clamped onto her wrist. She gasped, eyes flying up to meet the cold, sharp gaze of the man in the black suit. "You shouldn't have come here, kid," he said, voice low and dangerous. Emily kicked as hard as she could. His grip loosened, just enough for her to yank free. And then, she ran. Out of the alley, down the street, as fast as her legs could carry her. She didn't stop until she was home, breathless and shaking. She slammed the door shut behind her, heart pounding so loudly she could barely hear her mother calling her name. "Emily? What's wrong?" She turned to see her parents staring at her. She couldn't speak. Instead, she reached into her pocket and pulled out the USB drive. "I found something," she whispered. Her father's eyes widened, and then the front window shattered. A brick crashed into the living room floor, sending glass everywhere. Emily's mother screamed. Her father lunged forward, pulling her behind him. On the brick, a note was taped to it. Her father grabbed it with shaking hands and read the words aloud. "You were warned. Emily's stomach dropped. Whoever they weren't just watching anymore. They were coming for them. The living room was silent except for the faint tinkling of broken glass on the floor. Emily's father clutched the note, his hands trembling with barely contained rage. Her mother wrapped her arms around Jamie, holding him close as he whimpered. Outside, the police officers stationed at their house rushed in, their guns drawn. "What happened?" one of them demanded. Emily's father shoved the note at them. "This happened." The officer's jaw clenched as he read the message. "You were warned." The other officer picked up the brick. They threw it hard. If someone had been near the window, he didn't have to finish the sentence. Emily's stomach twisted into knots. She had already known they were in danger. But this was a declaration of war. Minutes later, Detective Harris arrived. His face was grim as he stepped inside, surveying the damage. "This isn't just a warning," he muttered, running a hand through his hair. "It's a promise." Emily's mother shivered. "A promise of what?" Harris locked eyes with her father. "That they won't stop until you're silenced." Emily hugged herself, trying to stop the shaking in her bones. Her father's jaw was tight. "We're not backing down." Detective Harris nodded. "Good. Because we have a problem." He turned to Emily. "What exactly did you find?" Emily's breath hitched. She hesitated, then slowly reached into her pocket and pulled out the USB drive. Her father's eyes widened. "Where did you get that?" Emily hesitated. I went to Grayson Industries." Her mother gasped. "Emily, you did what?" "I had to," Emily said quickly. "I knew there was something there. And I was right." Her father's face hardened. "Emily, that was dangerous. What if something had happened to you?" Emily felt tears burn her eyes. "Something is happening. People are trying to hurt us. If we don't do something, we'll never be safe." Silence. Then, her father's face softened. He sighed, rubbing his temples. "You're right." His voice was tired. "We can't just wait for them to make the next move." Detective Harris took the USB from Emily's hands. "Then let's find out what they were willing to kill to keep hidden." They gathered around the laptop as Detective Harris inserted the USB. Emily's heart pounded as the files loaded. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a folder appeared, labeled Project Shadow. A chill ran down Emily's spine. Harris clicked on it. Inside were hundreds of documents, financial records, secret accounts, names, dates, numbers. Her father leaned closer. "These are all illegal transactions. Money transfers, bribes." Harris scrolled further. Then his face turned pale. Emily's mother frowned. "What is it?" Harris's voice was low. "This isn't just about Grayson." Emily peeked at the screen, and then she saw it. Government officials, judges, high-ranking police officers. All of them were involved. Emily's breath caught in her throat. Grayson wasn't working alone. He was just one piece of a much bigger conspiracy. Her father exhaled sharply. "This goes all the way to the top." Detective Harris nodded. "And that's why they want you dead." Emily's mother's hand flew to her mouth. "Oh my God." Then, a sound. A car pulling up outside. Emily froze. Harris's head snapped up. "Who's that?" The police officers outside shouted something. Then gunfire erupted. Everyone hit the floor as bullets ripped through the house. Glass shattered. Wood splintered. Emily's ears rang as her father grabbed her and Jamie, pulling them to the ground. Her mother screamed. "Get down!" Harris shouted, drawing his weapon. Emily's heart pounded as more shots tore through the walls. Then, silence. Heavy footsteps on the porch. A deep voice growled from outside. "Burn it down." Emily's blood turned to ice. Then, a whoosh. Flames roared outside the windows. They were trapped. The house was on fire. Heat surged through the house as flames licked up the curtains and climbed the walls. Smoke choked the air, thick and black, making Emily's eyes burn. Her mother clutched Jamie tightly, coughing as she stumbled backward. Her father pulled Emily close, his grip strong but trembling. Detective Harris whipped his head around, scanning the room. "We need to move. Now." More gunshots blasted through the windows, and the front door shook as someone tried to force their way in. Emily's stomach clenched with fear. They weren't just trying to scare them. They were trying to kill them. Harris grabbed his radio. Officer down. The house is under attack. Requesting immediate backup. Static. No response. His face paled. They must have jammed the signal. The fire roared higher, the heat pressing against their skin. Then, a loud crash from the kitchen. Emily's head snapped around just in time to see 3 figures in black masks storm into the house. Guns raised. Her mother screamed. Harris fired first. A bang echoed through the room. One of the masked men dropped, clutching his leg as he fell. The others didn't hesitate. They opened fire, forcing Harris to dive behind the couch, dragging Emily and her father down with him. Bullets tore through the walls. The heat from the fire grew unbearable. Emily's father turned to Harris, his face grim. "We can't stay here." Harris gritted his teeth. "Then we fight our way out." Emily's father looked at Emily and her mother. "Get to the basement." Her mother hesitated. "But now." Emily's mother didn't argue. Holding Jamie tightly, she grabbed Emily's hand and ran toward the basement door. Emily's legs felt like lead, but she forced herself to move. Behind her, gunfire erupted again. Harris and her father held them off, but Emily knew they wouldn't last long. She stumbled down the basement steps, coughing as smoke filled her lungs. Her mother slammed the door shut behind them. "Help me push something against it," she gasped. Emily's hands shook as she helped her mother shove a heavy shelf against the door. A second later, boom, the entire house shook. Emily screamed, gripping the shelf as a blast of heat surged down the basement stairs. The fire had reached something explosive. Above them, they heard a crack, and then the floor collapsed. Emily barely had time to throw herself backward as a chunk of the house caved in, sending debris tumbling down the stairs. "Daniel," her mother screamed. Emily's father and Harris were still upstairs. Trapped. Tears blurred Emily's vision as she coughed through the thick smoke. Her mother clutched Jamie, rocking him as he wailed in terror. For a moment, everything felt hopeless. Then, Emily saw it. A small, rusted door at the back of the basement. A way out. "Mom!" she gasped, pointing. Her mother's eyes widened. "Come on." She grabbed Jamie, and together they raced toward the door. Emily threw her weight against it. It didn't budge. "No, no, no." Her mother joined in, shoving with all her strength. With a loud creak, the door burst open, revealing a dark underground tunnel. Emily's heart pounded. Where did it lead? They didn't have time to find out. Flames licked down the stairs, swallowing the basement behind them. They had no choice. Her mother grabbed Emily's hand, clutching Jamie close, and they ran into the darkness. The air in the tunnel was cold and damp, a stark contrast to the heat and chaos they just left behind. Emily's breath came in ragged gasps as she ran beside her mother, her heart pounding in her chest. Every footstep echoed through the narrow passageway, adding to the eerie feeling that someone, or something, was chasing them. Her mother's voice trembled as she whispered, "Hurry, Emily. Keep moving." Behind them, the flames continued to rage through the house, the distant crackling sound growing louder as the fire spread. Emily could still hear the screams, the gunfire, and the terrifying realization that her father and Detective Harris were still trapped upstairs. But they couldn't go back. They had to keep moving forward. Emily's mind raced. Her father, was he okay? Had Harris made it out alive? The thoughts swirled in her head, making it hard to focus. She wanted to turn around, go back, but her mother's grip on her hand was tight, pulling her forward through the darkness. The tunnel stretched out before them, long and unforgiving. They had no idea where it led or how far they would have to go. The cold dampness in the air clung to Emily's skin, making her shiver. "Mom," Emily said in a small voice, "where does this lead?" Her mother glanced down at her, her eyes filled with both worry and resolve. "I don't know, sweetheart. But it's the only chance we have." Emily nodded, though the doubt in her chest made it hard to breathe. What if they were walking into something worse? The tunnel felt endless. Time passed slowly as they trudged forward, the only sound their hurried footsteps and Jamie's soft cries. Emily kept glancing over her shoulder, half expecting to see shadows lurking in the dark. Finally, After what felt like an eternity, the tunnel began to widen. The air smelled fresher here, a sign that they were nearing the exit. Emily's eyes strained to make out any details in the pitch-black darkness. But then, ahead of them, a faint light began to appear. Her mother let out a relieved sigh. "We're almost there." They picked up their pace, the light growing brighter as they neared the end of the tunnel. The sound of distant voices reached Emily's ears. People. As they reached the end, Emily's heart skipped a beat. There was a grate blocking the exit, but it was already partially open. Someone had left it unlocked. Her mother wasted no time. She pushed it open, wincing as it screeched against the metal. And then, they were free. The bright light of the outside world nearly blinded Emily. She squinted, adjusting to the harsh daylight. They were standing in a small abandoned alley behind a row of buildings. The air was much fresher here, and the faint smell of smoke still hung in the distance. Emily's mother didn't hesitate. She grabbed her hand again, tugging her into the alley. "We need to move. Now." Emily nodded, glancing around nervously. But there was no time to waste. They moved quickly, staying low, keeping out of sight. Her mother's mind was racing. "We need to get to a safe place. I'll find somewhere we can hide." Emily didn't speak. She was too tired, too afraid. Every step felt heavier than the last. Then, as they turned a corner, they were met with a sharp, gruff voice. "Stop right there." Emily froze. Her mother stiffened. From the shadows stepped a man in a dark suit, the same kind of suit Emily had seen worn by the people involved with Mr. Grayson. The man's cold eyes were trained on them. "Who are you?" he demanded. Her mother quickly shielded Emily with her body. "Please," she said, her voice shaky. "We're just trying to get away." The man's eyes narrowed. "You don't look like the kind of people who just get away." Emily's heart was racing. Her mother stepped forward. "Please, we haven't done anything wrong. We're just—" But the man cut her off, his hand going to his side. Emily felt her chest tighten. Was he reaching for a weapon? Then, before anyone could react, the man raised his gun. Emily's body tensed, ready to scream, but suddenly, a loud shout echoed down the alley. "Hey, get away from them." The man turned just in time to see another figure running toward them, a young woman, dressed in black tactical gear, with a gun drawn. "Who are you?" The man sneered, raising his own weapon. The woman didn't flinch. "FBI." The man snarled, his eyes darting between the woman and the Carter family. But before he could make a move, the woman fired a warning shot into the air. "Drop your weapon," she commanded. The man hesitated for a moment, then cursed under his breath. With a swift motion, he threw his gun to the ground, hands raised. The woman motioned for Emily's mother to step back. "Get out of here. I'll take care of him." Her mother hesitated for a moment, confusion clouding her face. "Who are you? Why are you helping us?" The woman's expression softened slightly. "Let's just say I've been watching. And now, I'm here to make sure you don't get killed." Emily's mother stepped back, pulling Emily along with her. They moved quickly, not looking back. But as they turned the corner, Emily's mind was reeling. Who was this woman? And how had she known they were in danger? As they ran, the woman's voice echoed behind them. "Stay low, stay quiet, and don't stop running. I'll get you to safety. But you're not out of this yet." The words sent a shiver down Emily's spine. She didn't know who was chasing them anymore, but one thing was certain. This was far from over. The world outside was no less terrifying than the one they had just escaped. The streets felt alien, empty, deserted, as if everyone had vanished overnight. The woman, who had introduced herself simply as Agent Kennedy, led the way, her movements sharp and precise. She didn't look back, and neither did Emily's mother. They didn't have time for questions. They had to keep moving. Emily's legs ached from running, and her mind raced with 1,000 questions. Who was Agent Kennedy? Why had she helped them? What was going on? Were they truly safe now, or was this just another trap? They turned corner after corner, always looking over their shoulders. Every sound made Emily flinch: footsteps, distant voices, the wind rustling through the trees. There was a feeling of constant danger now, like the world was closing in on them. After what felt like hours of walking and running, Agent Kennedy led them to a small, unmarked van parked on the side of the road. Its windows were tinted, its engine humming quietly. "Get in," Kennedy ordered, unlocking the door with a sharp click. Her mother hesitated, but only for a second. "Is it safe?" Kennedy nodded, her eyes sharp. "You won't be safe anywhere else." Emily's mother held Jamie tightly as she helped Emily into the van. They didn't have a choice. If they stayed out on the streets, they'd never make it. As the van doors slammed shut, Emily leaned against the cold, metal interior, her heart racing. The world outside felt so far away, so different from the life they had once known. Now, they were on the run, with nothing but the clothes on their backs and the hopes that someone they didn't even know, would help them survive. Kennedy started the engine, and the van pulled away, merging into traffic. "We've got about an hour before we hit the safe house," she said, her voice calm but firm. "You can ask questions then. But for now, I need you to stay quiet." Emily nodded, her eyes darting to her mother, who was holding Jamie protectively against her chest. Her mother's face was pale, but she didn't look scared, not anymore. As the van drove through the quiet streets, Emily's mind raced. She wanted to know everything. Why Mr. Grayson had been so dangerous, why people were after them, and what this Project Shadow had to do with everything. But she knew now was not the time for questions. They had to stay low, stay hidden. Finally, the van turned down a narrow street, pulling into a quiet cul-de-sac. The houses here looked nothing like their own. Small, unassuming, hidden away in the shadows. Kennedy parked in front of one of the houses and looked back at Emily and her mother. "This is it," she said. "You'll be safe here for now. But you can't leave, not unless I say so. Understand?" Emily's mother nodded, her eyes still filled with fear, but also relief. Kennedy opened the door and stepped out, motioning for them to follow. The front door to the house was already open, and a man stood in the doorway, watching them carefully. He was tall, with dark hair and a serious expression. "Agent Kennedy," he greeted, stepping aside to let them in. "It's good to see you." Kennedy didn't respond at first. She simply nodded and led Emily's family inside. The house was surprisingly modest, with simple furniture and a dim, warm light. It felt like the last place anyone would look for a family in hiding. The man closed the door behind them and locked it with a soft click. "You're safe here for now, but there's still a lot to be done." "Thanks for the help, Rick," Kennedy said. "But we need to talk." Rick nodded, his face grim. "I figured as much. Come on in. I'll make some coffee." Emily and her mother sat down at the small table, with Jamie now asleep in his mother's arms. "What's going on, Agent Kennedy?" Emily's mother finally asked, her voice steady but strained. "Why are you helping us? Who are you really?" Kennedy paused, looking at both of them. For a moment, Emily thought she wouldn't answer at all. But then, her expression softened slightly. "My name's not important right now. What's important is that you understand how deep this goes," she said, her voice low and serious. Project Shadow wasn't just some illegal operation. It's a network, a powerful network that has its hands in almost everything. Politics, law enforcement, business, government. They control people, manipulate them, and when someone gets in their way, like your family, they eliminate them. Emily's stomach dropped. "Who are these people?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Why do they want to hurt us?" Kennedy's eyes flashed with something. Fear, anger, determination. They'll do anything to keep their secrets hidden. Mr. Grayson was just a small piece of the puzzle. He was their enforcer, someone they could control. But you, she turned to Emily's mother, you've got something they want. Something that can bring the whole network down. Emily's mind whirled. "What do you mean?" "You have the files," Kennedy said. "The ones that were on that USB drive. Grayson didn't just steal money. He and his people were covering up major crimes. Crimes that go all the way to the top. If they find out you have those files, they'll stop at nothing to get them back. That's why they've been after you." Her mother looked stunned, her hands trembling. "But I don't know anything about those files. I was just trying to protect my family." "You don't have to understand everything right now," Kennedy said, her voice hardening. "You just need to know one thing. You're in danger, and if we don't expose what they're doing, they'll come for you again." And they won't stop until they're sure you're gone. Emily's heart raced as the weight of Kennedy's words settled over her. She was right, they weren't safe. Not yet. And they wouldn't be, not until they took down the people who had destroyed their lives. But what could they do? They were just a family. They didn't have the power to take down a network this big. Kennedy's gaze softened as she looked at them. That's where I come in. I'm part of a task force that's been trying to bring this down for years. But we need your help. You need to give me those files, and we'll do everything we can to protect you and bring these people to justice. Her mother looked at Emily, then back at Kennedy. You're asking us to put everything on the line. Kennedy nodded. Yes, but you don't have a choice. This is the only way. And just like that, Emily knew. This wasn't just about her family anymore. It was about something much bigger, something that could bring down the entire network and maybe even change the world. But it wouldn't be easy. It would be dangerous. And the people who were after them would stop at nothing to make sure they failed. Emily swallowed hard, the weight of what was to come heavy on her shoulders. We're ready, she said, her voice steady despite the fear inside her. Let's bring them down. Kennedy smiled slightly, the first sign of warmth in her eyes. Good. Because the fight is just beginning. And as the sound of approaching sirens echoed in the distance, Emily knew one thing for sure. Their lives would never be the same again. The weight of the decision hung heavy in the air. Emily sat at the table, her hands tightly gripping the edges as Kennedy went over their plan. Her mother sat beside her, trying to keep Jamie calm in her arms, though he was starting to stir from his nap. The tension in the room was palpable. Kennedy's voice broke through the silence. We need to move quickly. We don't have much time before they realize the files are missing and come after us. Her mother nodded, looking more determined than Emily had seen her in a long time. She'd been through so much already. But this was a whole new level of danger. Emily could see it in her mother's eyes. The worry, the exhaustion, but also something else. Resolve. Where do we start? Emily's mother asked, her voice steady. Kennedy glanced at Rick, who had been quietly observing the conversation. He nodded to her. We'll need to contact our allies in the government. I have a few contacts that can help us, but it will take time to get everything in motion. The files you have, the ones Grayson tried to protect, are the key to bringing down the entire operation. But right now, we need to stay off their radar. No one can know you have them. Emily felt the coldness of those words. The files were their only bargaining chip, the one thing standing between them and their family's survival. If they didn't act fast, the people chasing them would close in, and they wouldn't hesitate to kill them all to protect their secrets. We can't just hide forever, Emily said, her voice shaking but filled with determination. We have to fight back. Kennedy's eyes softened slightly. I know, kid. But right now, staying alive is the first step. Once we can get the right people involved, we can fight back for real. We'll expose them. All of them. But Emily wasn't satisfied with that. She wanted more. She wanted justice. She didn't just want to run. She wanted to make sure Grayson's people were held accountable for everything they'd done. The people who had stolen her family's peace, her father's dignity, and her childhood. Her mother, noticing the fierce look on Emily's face, placed a hand gently on her shoulder. We'll get through this. Together. The door suddenly creaked open, and Emily's heart skipped a beat. Who was that? But it was just Rick, carrying a small bag in his hand. I've set up a safe house outside the city. It's isolated. No one will find you there. It'll give us some time to work on a plan. Kennedy nodded and turned back to Emily's family. We'll need to get you there now. No time to waste. Before they left, Kennedy turned back to Rick, speaking in hushed tones, making sure the plan was set. It felt strange, like everything was happening so fast. But in a way, Emily knew it was their only chance. They quickly packed what little they had left. It felt surreal, almost like a bad dream. But they had to keep going. There was no turning back. As they loaded into the van, Emily felt the familiar knot in her stomach. The van sped off, and as the city lights began to fade in the distance, she knew they were leaving everything behind. Their home, their life. But they were alive. And that, for now, was enough. Rick turned to Emily. How are you holding up? Emily forced a small smile. I'm okay. Just trying to stay focused. Kennedy glanced over her shoulder. You're doing good. This isn't easy. But remember, every day you stay alive, every day you hold onto those files, you're one step closer to ending this. For the first time in a long while, Emily felt like she wasn't powerless. She wasn't just a victim of some cruel game. She was part of something bigger now. They were going to take them down. Hours later, the van pulled off the main road and stopped at a small, unassuming house. It was isolated, surrounded by trees, and as quiet as the grave. They piled out of the van, and Kennedy led them into the house. It was furnished simply but comfortably, with a few chairs and a small kitchen. The feeling here was different, safer, quieter. Emily's mother sat down heavily, holding Jamie in her arms. How long do you think we'll be here? Not long, Kennedy said, her voice filled with conviction. We'll start the process tomorrow. Get the information to the right people. We've got a good team. They'll protect you while we build the case against Grayson's network. It's going to take time, but we'll get there. Emily looked at her mother, the weight of everything hanging between them. We're going to stop them, Mom. I promise. Her mother smiled, but it was a tired smile, the kind that came from a life of hardship. I believe you. I've never been prouder of you than I am right now. But as they settled into their new temporary home, Emily's thoughts kept drifting back to the files, the only thing that stood between them and the darkness that was chasing them. And she couldn't help but wonder, what would happen if they were wrong? What if the people behind this network were more powerful than they realized? What if they couldn't bring them down after all? But no matter how much fear gnawed at her insides, she knew one thing for sure. She was not going to give up. She would fight for her family. She would fight for the truth. And she would make sure the people who had destroyed their lives paid for everything they'd done.